Part man, part machine, and an icon of the 1980s, RoboCop predated the whole dark superhero film genre with his 1987 motion picture debut titled RoboCop. Very to the point. The film was ahead of its time in several ways, none of which we will explore here because we are here to talk about the Nintendo games that followed on the heels of the film franchise. To wit, we will discuss the RoboCop Nintendo Trilogy. You know, that's one bland title for an idea that gestated in my head for an entire weekend. On with the review. RoboCop's first NES adventure appeared courtesy of Data East in 1989. This was 2 years after the film debuted in theaters, and 1 year after the RoboCop arcade game. Yes, of course there was a RoboCop arcade game, and it is that version which the NES title patterns itself after. However, while the arcade game was praised for its intense Contra-style shoot-'em-up gameplay, the NES version was scorned for its stiff gameplay and lackluster graphics. In the NES version, Data East felt it wise to remove RoboCop's ability to jump. Perhaps this was an attempt at realism. Since RoboCop is supposed to be very heavy, Data East probably felt that jumping would be unrealistic. Problem is, RoboCop could jump in the arcade game, and the gameplay was better for it. With jumping removed from the gameplay, the player now faced the challenge of maneuvering the stiff, slow, and lumbering RoboCop through a battle against significantly faster, stronger, and cheap opponents. RoboCop's pistol is underpowered and inaccurate. The few other weapons RoboCop acquires are unspectacular in their efficiency, with the exception of a bazooka-like cannon RoboCop receives later in the game. Ironically, RoboCop would have been better off if he was relegated to using only his fists for the duration of the game. Data East was not renowned for games that had a lot of visual polish. Their graphics often appeared stiff and decorated with unspectacular color schemes that screamed low quality. To wit, in Data East's RoboCop, the animations are herky-jerky, the colors are ugly, and strangely, most of the enemies appear to be much smaller than RoboCop. Now, I understand RoboCop is supposed to be tall, but he isn't supposed to be a giant. This version of RoboCop clearly towers over his foes, dwarfing average-sized humans by several feet, making him seem abnormally large. In the end, we have ourselves a game that is okay, but way short of great. At this point, one can only hold out hope that the sequel would be better. Hopes were dashed upon the 1991 arrival of Ocean's RoboCop 2, a game so dreadful that fans would declare the first game a work of inspired genius. Ocean revamped the gameplay laid down by Data East in the first title, and eschewed the design of their own popular arcade adaptation to create an impossible, almost unplayable exercise in fury. Ocean realized that jumping was essential for a video game version of RoboCop. However, in the process of restoring RoboCop's jumping abilities, they ended up compromising his walking abilities. Again, it seems like the programmers were going for realism by simulating RoboCop's weight, because trying to move RoboCop around in this game is like trying to move me out of bed on a cold winter weekend in the middle of January. Ain't gonna happen. Yeah, RoboCop moves around stiff as a board, until he gets a running start. Once again, since Robo barely responds to the controls, you can bet that our leaden hero will careen to his doom by his own will once he gets ahead of steam and goes flying off the game set. See? I didn't do that. He did. He knows how awful his game is. The graphics are absolutely awful and inappropriate for the subject matter. Bright day-glow colors and super deformed-esque proportions do not belong in a game about a drug-busting, tragic cyborg cop. Especially if said game's supposed to be emulating the movie about a drug-busting, tragic cyborg cop. Graphically, the game looks less like the world of RoboCop and more like the world of HR Pufnstuf. The music sounds like it was composed by the all-star video game lethargic nasal drip orchestra. In other words, the tunes are as bad as the graphics and gameplay. What we have here is a bona fide video turd, ladies and gentlemen. Step back and do not touch. It is poisonous. Now you think that this abomination would have killed the NES RoboCop franchise for good, but oh how wrong you'd be. For in 1992, Ocean released one final RoboCop title based on the last theatrical RoboCop feature to date, RoboCop 3. Probe handled the programming duties this time, with Ocean standing in as distributors. Thank goodness. Probe did the wise thing and went about adapting the gameplay around RoboCop's 1988 arcade adventure. That said, RoboCop 3 looks and plays quite similar to the first NES outing,
Only this time he can jump. The graphics look significantly better, and there is an innovative touch or two. For instance, when RoboCop becomes damaged after fighting off street thugs, he will experience damage and system malfunctions. What happens next is that old Robo's legs may not work quite right, or his shooting ability may become impaired, leaving him to rely on other methods of attack. If the player can get RoboCop to the end of the stage, there will be a chance to repair him using points acquired throughout the level. A nice touch to a game that is otherwise average. Not like average is a bad thing in this case, for we all know now that things could be a lot worse. The graphics are reminiscent of RoboCop's first NES outing, only this time he and the backgrounds have a little more detail. In the end, RoboCop 3 is both admirable and unremarkable. It is hard to imagine a player remembering this game even immediately after playing it, since it leaves no impression whatsoever.
And there you have it, folks, another review in the can. And just so you know, I am not wearing any pants.